The bow. The sign outside the enclosure warned every visitor to keep distance because the Night Crown did not respect fences or pride, and the staff did not promise rescue if someone made a foolish move. It was a polite warning wrapped around a hard truth that this was the apex of the zoo, and all the other pens existed to make this one look safe by comparison. The viewing deck was wide and bright with polished rails, and drift screens that showed angles from hidden cameras. Vendors sold glow fruit and vapor tea. Children leaned forward and adults pretended not to lean with them. The air smelled like metal and sugar and a hint of ozone from the shield lattice that curved over the habitat like a second sky. The human tour arrived late in the cycle, and the guide was tired enough to skip the usual jokes. Her name was Ressa, and she kept a hand on the rail as if the railing could feel her nerves. With her walked a small group from Earth and 2 colonies, a teacher named Mara, a ship tech named Faisal, a pair of cousins who argued about everything, an older man with a slow step, and a child who held a soft toy shaped like a starfish with too many points. The child stood very still and watched the shadowed rocks and prairies of sooty grass that rolled to the far wall where black stone rose, in crooked towers. Somewhere in those towers sat the Night Crown. The guide began the script anyway because habit was strong. She spoke of the planet where the Night Crown had evolved under thin light and heavy gravity, where nothing moved unless it had to move, where stillness won more fights than speed. She spoke of the crown of dark quills that spread when it hunted, and lay flat when it slept. She said the keepers fed it with drones and never went inside. She said it had never bowed to a soul, and never would. A few in the crowd laughed at the theatrical tone and took pictures of themselves with the warning signs. The child tugged at Mara's sleeve and asked if the Night Crown was sad. Mara said she did not know, and that sadness in one species might look like calm in another, or hunger, or a plan. The child nodded like this made sense in a simple way. Faisal leaned in and whispered that sensors showed the beast back near the stone, but heat mirage made the picture soft. The cousins argued about which ridge it would use if it rushed the shield. The older man had the slow kind of breath that sounds like a creak in a ship. He closed his eyes and listened to the space between the guide's words as if that space mattered more than the words. A flicker moved under the far towers, and became a line and then became a shape that was nothing like a line at all. It stepped out with the careful grace of a thing that knew what every muscle did and why it should not waste energy on display. The quills lay flat and slick along its skull. Its shoulders were high and narrow, and its forelimbs hung like questions. When it turned its head, the glass of 100 screens caught the shine of its eyes and sent it back to the crowd as a smear of green and gold. The noise on the deck sank until it became the kind of silence that can hold a whole station. The Night Crown walked to the edge of the field and stopped. The shield shimmered like heat. The beast lifted its head and scented the crowd. Some visitors stepped back without knowing they had stepped. A pair of security drones shifted position and made a soft tone that said they were awake. The beast looked along the rail and then stopped again as if it had heard a note inside the noise. The child with the starfish toy stood on tiptoe. The toy slipped and fell. It bounced once and slid under the lower rail, then over the smooth lip of the viewing edge and dropped to the ground inside the habitat where the grass met the stone. No one spoke. The guide reached for the emergency cord and then did not pull it because she understood that a wrong alarm could be as dangerous as a late one. Mara put a hand on the child's shoulder. The child did not cry. The Night Crown lowered its head until its jaw almost brushed the grass, and then it moved with a slow patience that turned seconds into long, bright threads. It walked to the toy as if the toy might jump or bite. It placed one forepaw on either side of the starfish shape and looked up at the humans. The crowd leaned forward in one breath. The beast folded its limbs and lowered its chest to the ground. The quills pressed flat until they seemed to melt into the skin. The head came down and the muzzle touched the toy and then the earth. It held that pose without a sound. It was a bow as clean as a line drawn with a steady hand. It was not fear, and it was not a trick, not a dead feint or a glitch in muscle fibers, but a choice built of nerve and memory. It stayed like that for 3 breaths, and then it lifted the toy with the bare edge of its teeth and set it down again, closer to the rail, as if it returned an offering. The drones did not fire because they did not know what to shoot at. The guide did not pull the cord because she could not find a reason in the rulebook that matched the shape of this moment. The cousins stopped arguing. The older man opened his eyes and a wet shine stood there for a second, and then was gone. Faisal said very quietly that he had never seen a machine freeze from too much data, but he was seeing it now in the way the drones hung. Mara met the gaze of the night crown and saw no hate there and no simple peace either, but a strange weight that felt like respect aimed at something small but steady. The child let go of Mara's sleeve and stepped to the lower rail. The shield hum rose a fraction and then steadied. The night crown lowered its head again as the child whispered thank you in a voice that any mic could have missed, but the beast did not miss it. The bow deepened until the quills touched dirt. Cameras from half the deck caught the angle. News tags on people's sleeves began to flash. Across the station, feeds changed. The words, unbreakable and kneel climbed together up the side of 1,000 walls. When the night crown rose, it did not show its teeth. It took 2 steps back and watched the child the way a scout watches a campfire at the edge of a cold plain. The guide found her voice and told everyone to stay calm and to breathe and to take 3 slow steps back in a line. She called security, and her tone said, "Come and see, but do not break this." Mara put a hand on the child's shoulder again and felt the small, fast heart slow down in time with her own. On the far side of the deck, a voice shouted that humans had rigged the scene, and that the beast had been conditioned to perform. Another voice screamed for the shield to double. A third voice prayed in a language that did not have a word for Night Crown. The station listened and held its breath. The predator stood and waited in stillness that looked like a door half open. The child whispered a second thank you. The door did not close. It waited for what came next. The Galactic Zoo was famous across thousands of systems and carried a reputation that balanced wonder and terror because it held in cages and sanctuaries the most dangerous living beings ever captured. Among them, the most whispered about was the Night Crown, a predator from a heavy gravity world that killed anything that crossed its shadow. Warnings covered the viewing deck and the glowing rails with words translated into 100 tongues, telling visitors that no species had ever tamed or controlled the Night Crown, and that the shield around its enclosure was not guaranteed. Vendors still sold drinks and trinkets to curious tourists who gathered every cycle to see if today would be the day something would happen. Families leaned forward. Security drones hummed overhead, and the air carried the faint bite of ozone from the shield lattice that curved like glass over the stone habitat. The human group arrived later than expected and moved together as a cluster. They were ordinary in every sense. A teacher from Earth named Mara, a ship mechanic called Faisal, 2 cousins from a colony who argued over everything, an older man who walked slowly with each step, and a child who clutched a stuffed toy shaped like a 5-pointed starfish. Their guide Ressa had given the same speech so many times she no longer believed the words but still spoke them, describing how the Night Crown came from a world where stillness and patience meant survival, how its quills would flare when it hunted and lie flat when it slept, and how no one had ever seen it bow to anyone. Her tone was tired, but the crowd still listened because the legend of the predator always drew attention. The child stared at the black towers of stone that marked the far side of the habitat and asked Mara if the beast was sad. Mara said softly that sadness was a human word and other creatures showed feelings in ways that might not match what humans understood. The child nodded, as if that made perfect sense, and squeezed the toy closer. Faisal checked a feed on his wristband and told Mara that the sensors marked the predator as awake near the ridge, but heat distortion blurred the shape. The cousins argued about whether it would charge straight or circle if it ever tried to breach the shield. The old man closed his eyes and listened to the silence between the guide's words and seemed to hear something deeper. A ripple moved across the far rocks, and then a shape emerged that froze every visitor in place. The Night Crown stepped into the pale light with a precision that showed total control of its body. Its shoulders rose high, its quills lay slick against its skull, and its long limbs carried it forward with quiet power. Its eyes reflected the station lights into streaks of gold and green that made every camera flare. The noise of the crowd sank until it became silence thick enough to make hearts pound louder than voices. The predator stopped at the edge of the field, lifted its head and tasted the air with slow breaths. Some visitors stumbled back. Drones shifted position, alarms primed. but the beast only looked. Then the child's toy slipped from small hands, bounced once on the deck, rolled under the guardrail and fell into the habitat where it landed on dark grass. The guide almost pulled the emergency cord, but her hand froze because she did not know which protocol fit this situation. Mara pressed the child's shoulder to keep them calm. The night crown lowered its head and walked forward with steps that stretched time itself. It reached the toy, placed its paws to either side, and stared up at the humans on the rail. The entire deck leaned forward as one body. The predator bent its chest to the earth, pressed its quills flat, and lowered its jaw until it touched the ground beside the toy. It was not a fall or a glitch, but a deliberate bow held in silence that stretched for 3 breaths. Gasps ran across the viewing deck. Cameras flashed, drones hung without command, and even the arguing cousins lost their words. The old man opened his eyes and tears shone for a moment before fading. Faisal whispered that machines did not freeze unless their code failed, yet the drones above were locked motionless as if they too were stunned. Mara met the gaze of the predator and saw no hunger and no empty peace, but a strange respect. The child stepped forward, whispering thank you, and though the voice was small, the night crown heard. It lowered its head deeper as if answering. Feeds across the zoo lit up with the words unbreakable and kneel flashing together on walls and sleeves. The predator stepped back, left the toy near the rail, and watched the child with steady patience, as if waiting for what would come next. The zoo did not sleep after the bow because every visitor carried the image into the wider station, and every recording spread through networks that jumped faster than any official announcement. By the next cycle, the viewing deck was 3 times as full and security was doubled. The Galactic Council sent observers. Scientists from distant worlds argued in loud voices across the concourse, and reporters demanded access to the enclosure. The zoo authority insisted that the shield was functioning as normal and that no breach had occurred, yet they could not deny that the night crown had bent its body in a gesture no record had ever described. The mystery was too large to silence, and too strange to explain away. The handlers tried at once to reproduce the moment. They sent in visitors of different species, noble delegates from high-gravity planets, priests from empathy guilds, and singers whose voices were known to calm predators. But the night crown ignored them all. It sat on its haunches by the dark stone ridge and only watched with cool, steady eyes. Some guests shouted and waved, some tried to mimic the human child's voice, and some hurled small objects into the grass, but the predator never moved. The drones hovered, ready to fire if danger rose, yet no danger came. Every attempt failed until the zoo allowed humans to approach once more. Mara walked with the child to the rail, and the crowd held its breath. The night crown rose from the ridge, as if woken by a silent call, and moved again with the grace of a tide flowing downhill. It stopped before the rail, folded its limbs, and bowed with the same unhurried respect. The cameras burst with color. The crowd gasped in disbelief. The staff tried again with non-humans, and again the predator refused. Whispers filled the air that humans had hidden knowledge or had bred the beast in secret. A delegate from the Spiral Commonwealth accused the Earth delegation of trickery and demanded answers. The council observers logged everything but said nothing. The zoo authority locked down the enclosure to prevent panic. They barred entry to most visitors, sealed the concourse, and summoned xenobiologists to test theories. Specialists argued that perhaps the night crown responded to a frequency in human voices, or perhaps to a hormone trace in human scent. Others believed it was fear that triggered the bow, because humans carried a strange stillness learned from living on a dangerous world. Some claimed it was not respect but recognition of a predator greater than itself. None of the theories could be proven. The predator bowed to humans and to no one else. Meanwhile, tension grew outside the barriers. Other visitors resented the attention humans received. Protests formed in the upper galleries accusing humans of tampering with the creature's mind. Some called for the predator to be destroyed before it became a weapon in human hands. Traitors whispered that military factions would pay any price to learn why the Night Crown submitted. Religious groups declared it a sign of prophecy and demanded pilgrimage rites. The zoo that once showed creatures for entertainment became a cumbersome battlefield of ideas and accusations. Mara tried to shield the child from the noise, but reporters surrounded them, whenever they stepped onto the deck. They asked what the child had felt, what words had been spoken, and if the toy carried some hidden device. The child only said that the predator was not angry, and that it listened. Faisal grew angry at the constant suspicion and swore that no human had built such a beast. The cousins joked less and began to watch the crowds instead of the animal. The old man muttered that when too many people stare at one secret, the secret grows teeth. Ressa the guide was questioned by her own employers who feared scandal, and she repeated again and again that she had not touched the emergency cord because nothing in the rule book had prepared her for a predator bowing to a child. Inside the enclosure, the night crown paced by the shield as if waiting. It showed no aggression, but its presence carried a weight that pressed on every soul who stood near. Visitors who believed themselves brave found their knees weak when the eyes of the beast rested on them. Yet when Mara and the child returned, to the rail the predator lowered itself once more in the deliberate bow that had set the galaxy aflame. The bow became a symbol printed on screens and armbands, painted on banners, and flashed in every transmission. Across the systems, people argued about what it meant. Some said humans were dangerous beyond reason. Others said the predator had revealed a hidden bond that proved humans belonged in the heart of galactic life, and not on the edges. Still others said it was an omen of conflict yet to come. The zoo could not hold the storm forever. Lockdowns only fueled anger. Security drones faced protesters who demanded to see the predator with their own eyes. Council observers prepared reports heavy with suspicion. Military envoys began to appear in the docking rings. The simple bow of a beast had become a political fire that no barrier could contain. And all the while, the Night Crown waited in silence, at the edge of the stone ridge, bowing only to humans. And in that waiting there grew a sense that something larger was moving just beyond sight, and that the quiet before the storm could not last much longer. The protests grew hotter with every passing cycle, and the zoo became less like a sanctuary and more like a fortress under siege. Visitors who had come only to marvel at rare creatures now found themselves in crowds shouting accusations or waving banners. Some banners declared humans had enslaved the predator in secret labs, and others claimed the bow was proof that humans were chosen by fate. Council guards filled the concourse, and even the station authorities worried that violence would break out in the shadow of the enclosure. The humans at the center of the storm could barely move through the halls without being followed by cameras and angry voices. Mara tried to keep the child calm, but the pressure of the crowd grew heavier each hour, and even the old man who once seemed so quiet began to mutter warnings about storms breaking bones. The zoo staff increased their security patrols, but even there, drones could not control the emotions spreading like fire. On the third cycle after the bow, a group of activists forced their way past a barrier, shouting that the predator was a fraud and had to be exposed. They threw smoke bombs into the concourse, and alarms shrieked through the halls. Visitors panicked and stampeded. Vendors fled their stalls, and families clutched children as the air filled with shouts and cries. In the chaos, one of the gates to the enclosure was damaged. The shield lattice flickered and dropped for a breath before resetting. That breath was enough. The Night Crown slipped through the gap like a shadow escaping its shape and entered the concourse where fear ruled every step. People screamed and scattered in every direction. Security drones locked weapons on the predator and prepared to fire, but their hesitation cost them precious seconds. The Night Crown did not charge the nearest group or strike down the weakest target. Instead, it moved with deliberate steps toward Mara and the child who stood frozen by the rail. Its quills were not raised, its jaw was not open, and its body did not carry the tension of an attack. Instead, it placed itself before the humans, as if shielding them from the storm of bodies and drones around them. The scene stunned everyone, because it was not a predator hunting prey, but a predator defending a chosen pack security. Shouted for civilians to move away, but Mara refused to leave the child. Faisal stood beside her with his fists clenched as if ready to fight machines and beast alike. The cousins stopped their endless arguments and simply pressed shoulder to shoulder with their human group. The old man leaned on the rail, but his eyes were sharper than before, as if he saw something that others could not. The Night Crown lowered its head toward the child, in the same calm bow as before, and the child whispered without fear. Around them the smoke swirled and alarms kept screaming, but the predator made a wall of stillness that nothing could break. The drones finally received orders to fire, but their targeting systems confused friend from foe because the humans stood so close. The officers hesitated, and their hesitation spread to the crowd who saw the predator standing like a guardian instead of a monster. Protesters who had thrown smoke bombs stopped shouting. Reporters captured every angle and every second of the bow in the chaos. The activists who wanted to expose a fraud now faced the truth that the beast was not enslaved and not tricked. It was acting with its own will, and that will was to guard the Humans Council. Observers rushed to the scene, but their presence only added to the tension. One demanded the predator be destroyed before it hurt anyone. Another demanded it be studied in isolation. None could deny the sight before them. The humans were safe only because the predator chose to protect them. The zoo authority tried to regain control of the narrative, but it was too late. The image of the night crown shielding the humans spread faster than any official statement could travel. Across the station, people asked why the apex killer of the galaxy would bow to humans and why it would place itself between them and danger. When order finally returned and the smoke cleared, the night crown did not flee or fight. It stood beside the humans until the last alarm faded, then walked calmly back through the broken gate into its enclosure. The shield sealed behind it as if nothing had happened. The humans were escorted away under heavy guard, but everyone knew that the storm had only begun. The bow had become more than a gesture. It was now an act of defiance against fear and against the powers who believed predators and people could never share trust. The galaxy had witnessed something no law could contain and no authority could explain, and deep within its enclosure the night crown waited with calm eyes for the next step that would decide the future of beasts and humans alike. The council chamber was crowded with delegates when the reports of the escape and the bow reached their ears, and arguments erupted before the recorders could even begin. Some called for the predator to be executed and its body dissected for science, while others said it must be kept alive as proof of a deeper mystery. Human representatives demanded that the night crown not be harmed because it had shown no violence to them and had in fact protected their people during the chaos. The debate stretched for hours and spilled across networks until every citizen of the station knew that the fate of the predator was no longer a matter of zoo policy, but of galactic law. In the middle of these debates, whispers began to spread of an old archive, buried deep in forgotten files. A record from a frontier expedition long before the zoo had ever been built. The archive spoke of a time when human explorers had landed on a world shrouded in thin light and heavy air. They had been warned that no species survived long in the presence of the creatures there, yet the humans had not been slaughtered as expected. According to the faded report, the explorers had moved slowly and had kept their breathing steady and their eyes clear of panic. They had carried no loud weapons and had held their ground when the beasts came near. Something in that stillness had touched the predators, and instead of killing, they had bowed their heads and passed by. It was not worship and not submission, but a recognition written into instinct that humans would not waste fear where fear did not belong. The expedition had vanished from records soon after, its findings dismissed or buried. But now, with the bow seen in the zoo, those words returned with new weight. Xenobiologists studied the fragments and compared them with the present events. They argued that the night crown might carry memory in its blood, passed from generation to generation, a memory of humans who had once faced them without trembling. They said the bow was not magic and not conditioning, but the echo of an old pact formed in silence on a distant world. Some resisted this idea because it challenged the belief that humans were ordinary and weak in the vast scale of the galaxy. Yet others felt a chill as they wondered if humans carried within themselves something that even predators recognized, a steady fire that could not be broken. The protests outside the zoo changed their tone as these ideas spread. Some demanded that humans should share their secret with all species. Others feared that humans were more dangerous than ever imagined. Inside the enclosure, the night crown remained calm. It did not test the shield again, and it did not pace in hunger. It waited near the stone ridge with eyes fixed on the human visitors allowed by strict schedule. When the child returned, the predator lowered its body in the same deliberate bow, and the crowd gasped again, though by now the gesture was almost expected. Reporters asked the child what words had been spoken that day in the chaos, and the child said only that they had whispered thank you. Such simple words carried across the systems like fire through dry grass, and many began to believe that respect and calm could tame even the fiercest jaws. Yet others saw danger in this idea and feared that predators across the galaxy might also bow to humans one day, leaving other species powerless in comparison. Military envoys arrived quietly and spoke of using the Night Crown in controlled combat. Religious leaders declared the bow as a sign that humanity carried divine favor. Traders whispered that humans could charge fortunes for their presence near predators. The zoo authorities no longer held control of their own exhibit. What had once been a place of learning and entertainment had become a battlefield of politics, faith, and fear. Mara watched all of this with heavy eyes, knowing that the child had not asked for any of it. The old man reminded her that history often turned on small gestures, and that sometimes innocence carried more strength than armies. When the council gathered again to hear testimonies, Mara stood with the child and spoke plainly. She said the predator was not a monster and not a weapon, but a being that had made a choice. She said the bow was not for sale and not for power, but for respect. Many laughed at her words, but some listened, and in their eyes was doubt that had not been there before. The Night Crown waited in its stone shadow as the galaxy argued over its meaning, and in that waiting, the sense grew that the story was not yet finished. The bow had opened a door, and behind that door something vast was stirring. No one knew if it would be peace or war, but all knew the path forward would not be simple. The protests outside the zoo turned into riots when word spread that certain factions within the council wanted the predator destroyed to end the dispute. Many believed that if the Night Crown lived, it would become a symbol too dangerous to control. Others believed that if it was killed, the act would prove that fear ruled the galaxy more than respect. In the middle of this storm, a small group of saboteurs found their chance. They were paid by shadowed hands that feared human influence, and they carried weapons meant not for capture but for silent elimination. Under the cover of maintenance schedules, they entered the hidden tunnels that wound beneath the enclosures, where alarms were fewer and where shadows were deeper than the light above. The Night Crown sensed them before any guard did. In the middle of the night cycle, it rose from its stone ridge and pressed its body against the ground, listening to the vibrations that carried through soil and wall. The predator lifted its head with a low growl that no machine recorded, but the humans visiting under special clearance felt it in their bones. Mara woke from light sleep inside the observation lounge and saw the beast pacing the edge of the shield, with quills rising in warning. Faisal checked the monitors, but nothing showed until a camera flickered in the lower tunnels. Then shapes moved in the dark, armed figures advancing toward a service hatch. Before alarms could sound, the predator struck its claws against the stone, in a rhythm that echoed like thunder. The sound guided Mara and the others to the right screen where the danger was revealed. Security scrambled, but the saboteurs were already too close. The predator pressed against the shield and raked its quills in fury. Yet it did not turn its anger on the humans. Instead, it herded them toward the safe side of the observation deck with slow steps and a gaze that left no room for argument. The child understood first and tugged Mara to follow. The humans ran along the deck as drones moved to intercept the saboteurs. Shots rang out in the tunnels and sparks flared where walls were struck. The saboteurs spread out in silence, using hand signs practiced for war. They thought themselves hunters, but the predator and the humans together proved otherwise. The Night Crown leapt against the shield with such force that the hum of the lattice rose higher than ever before. The sound shook dust from the beams and made the saboteurs flinch. That flinch was all Faisal needed to pinpoint their location on the feed. He guided security teams into position, while Mara whispered steady words to the child, keeping fear from breaking their rhythm. The cousins who once argued over everything now kept watch for signs of movement on the screens, and the old man repeated in a calm voice that predators respect stillness more than noise. The Night Crown paced the humans with every step, as if their pulse and its own had become one pattern. In the tunnels, the saboteurs realized they had been discovered and turned their fire on drones and guards alike. They wanted the predator destroyed before the truth of its bond with humans spread further. They shouted that no species should kneel to another, and that balance had to be preserved even by blood. Their words carried hatred but also fear. The predator answered with silence that pressed on them heavier than bullets. It struck the stone floor again and guided security down a side tunnel. The ambush failed because the humans understood the rhythm and the guards trusted their strange alliance with the beast. One by one, the saboteurs were driven back until only wreckage and smoke remained in the maintenance halls. When the fighting ended, the predator returned to its ridge. It did not roar in triumph, and it did not bare its teeth. Instead, it lowered its head once more to the humans who had followed its guidance and bowed. The meaning was clear to all who saw it. The predator was not an enemy and not a weapon to be used in shadows. It was a partner that had chosen its place, and that place was beside the humans who had stood calm in the storm. The reports of the incident spread across the station and beyond. Some accused the humans of staging even this event. Others whispered that the predator and humanity had begun a pact older and stronger than any treaty of the council. The council chambers filled again with shouting voices, but this time, the images of the predator guiding humans through danger could not be ignored. The argument shifted from whether the beast should live to whether it should be recognized as more than a specimen in a cage. Religious leaders spoke of destiny, while generals spoke of danger. Traders saw new opportunities, and activists saw proof that captivity was wrong for such beings. Mara sat in silence with the child beside her and knew that the future had turned down a path none could have predicted. The bow had begun a fire, and that fire was spreading beyond control. The galaxy would have to decide whether to fight the flame or walk through it together with the predator and the humans who had earned its trust. The council finally reached a breaking point when demands arrived from across the sectors that the Night Crown be brought before the assembly itself. Some delegates wanted it executed in the open so that all could see humans held no special power. Others wanted it displayed as living proof that humans carried something ancient and dangerous within them. Security argued it was too great a risk, but the debate carried more weight than caution. In the end, the decision was made that the predator would be transported under heavy guard to the rotunda of the Galactic Council, where its fate would be sealed in one vote. Rumors spread faster than ships, and by the time the cycle of judgment arrived, entire systems tuned in to witness history. The transport was like no other. A shielded carrier built to hold war machines was used, and around it flew escorts of drones and patrol ships. Yet even within its cage, the Night Crown was calm. It did not pace, and it did not strike the walls. It lay with its head low, as if it already knew where the path would lead. Mara and the child were summoned to accompany the transport against the advice of some leaders, but their presence was demanded by the council to prove the bond was real. Faisal and the cousins came as well, and the old man refused to be left behind. They traveled together under the eyes of thousands who lined the concourses of the station to watch the predator pass. When the carrier opened inside the rotunda, silence swept the chamber. The Night Crown stepped into the hall with slow grace, quills flat and eyes glowing under the high lights. Delegates flinched, though shields stood between them. Guards raised rifles, though their hands trembled. The predator ignored them all and turned its gaze only to the humans who walked behind it. The child carried the worn toy starfish and clutched it close. When the beast saw the toy, it lowered its body into the bow once more. Cameras captured the moment, and the image spread in real time across the galaxy. Some wept and some cursed, but none could deny the truth of what they saw. Debates began at once. Voices rose in anger that such a creature dared enter the sacred chamber. Others argued that this act proved it was not a beast, but a being worthy of recognition. Military delegates shouted that humans must be restricted before their influence grew unchecked. Human representatives countered that humanity had asked for nothing except respect. The noise grew, until it seemed the chamber itself might shake apart. In the middle of the storm, the predator moved. It rose from its bow and stepped between the human group and the circle of armed guards. Its quills spread not in rage but in warning that any strike would pass through it before touching the humans. For the first time since the first bow, the predator's choice was no longer silence, but open defiance. The chamber froze. No one ordered the guards to fire. The council speaker struck the podium and demanded a vote. The choices were simple and brutal. Either the predator would be destroyed as a danger to all, or it would be recognized as a sovereign being under the protection of law. Delegates whispered to their aides and weighed the eyes of the galaxy watching. The humans stood behind the beast with hands linked and shoulders firm. The old man whispered that history bent at moments such as this. The child lifted the toy starfish and held it high as if to remind everyone that innocence had begun this journey. The predator lowered its head once again, not to the council but to the child, and in that bow the meaning became clear. It was not kneeling to power or to fear, but to a bond built on calm hearts. The vote came in waves of light across the chamber walls. Some delegates wept as they pressed for recognition. Others pressed for destruction with fury in their voices. The lights tallied until the final result shone above the rotunda. By a narrow margin, the predator was spared and declared free under the law. The chamber erupted with shouts of rage and joy mixed together. Guards lowered their rifles, though their hands still shook. Reporters transmitted the decision to every corner of the galaxy. The predator remained in its place unmoving until the speaker announced the verdict aloud. Only then did it rise fully and step aside, allowing the humans to stand before the council without its shield. The meaning was simple. It had stood between them and danger only until their voices had been heard. The galaxy would not find peace easily after this vote. Many who had lost demanded revenge. Many who had doubted now believed in something they could not explain. The predator was returned to the zoo, but no longer as a prisoner. Its enclosure was open to new design, and its status changed from exhibit to sanctuary. The bow had reshaped law itself. Mara knew the struggle was not finished. She could see the storm still waiting beyond the walls. Yet for that moment in the council rotunda, the humans and the predator had stood together and had not been broken. That image would burn into memory across every world, whether friend or foe. The path forward was uncertain, but one truth had been carved into the heart of the galaxy. Humanity was no longer overlooked, and the predator no longer unseen. The predator had returned to its sanctuary in the galactic zoo, but its life was forever changed. The enclosures had been redesigned with open spaces and natural landscapes to simulate the wild worlds from which it had come, yet no barrier could truly measure the freedom it now carried. Humans came often to visit, some traveling from far systems, just to see the being that had bowed only to them. Mara and the child were regular guests, their bond unbroken by distance or time. The predator recognized them immediately, its gaze softening and posture lowering in greeting. News of the council's decision had spread like fire, and the zoo became a place of pilgrimage where delegates, scientists, and thrill-seekers came to witness a legend alive and breathing. Some came out of curiosity, others out of fear, and a few out of awe, knowing that in the presence of the predator they were confronted by something greater than themselves. Mara often walked along the observation platforms while the child ran along, the pathways waving at the creatures inside each enclosure. The child laughed freely, tossing small pieces of fruit toward the predator, which caught them with precision and returned a sound that could only be described as amusement. Other species observed quietly from afar, sensing the bond and deferring, as if instinctively aware of the predator's authority. Even the guards who once escorted the transport treated the predator with reverence, lowering weapons when it approached and stepping aside without command. Scientists conducted studies not with fear but with respect, documenting every movement, every subtle reaction, noting how a creature once labeled the deadliest in the galaxy could display intelligence, patience, and loyalty, unlike anything recorded. Mara watched the predator tilt its head toward her, and she knew that every step they had taken together had led to this moment, a balance between caution and trust that few could comprehend. As months passed, the predator became a symbol of something that had never existed before. The council debated its recognition as a galactic ambassador, a living testament to humanity's connection with life that no warship could destroy and no treaty could define. Envoys came from distant systems requesting guidance and permission to study the interactions, to understand the bond that had forced the galaxy to reconsider power and respect. Mara traveled with the child, explaining their journey, demonstrating how empathy and courage had turned a creature feared for centuries into an ally for those willing to see beyond instinct. Meanwhile, the predator's presence influenced others inside the zoo. Creatures that had been aggressive or untouchable showed moments of calm and curiosity, mirroring the human visitors. Even the most vicious beings softened in its vicinity, creating corridors of observation where humans and alien predators coexisted without threat or submission. The child grew taller and wiser with each passing cycle, learning the names of stars and the whispers of planets while Mara recorded stories and incidents for archives that might one day be taught across schools in multiple systems. Yet even with the fame and influence, the predator remained unchanged. Its loyalty was singular, its focus unwavering. When new visitors arrived, it tested them briefly with a glance or a subtle stance, but always returned to bow when the child approached. Mara often wondered if the act had changed the predator, or if it had always been waiting for someone worthy to earn that gesture. The galaxy continued its rotations, stars burned bright, and fleets patrolled borders, but the predator and the humans had created a space that needed no fleets, no weapons, and no alarms. It was a sanctuary in the truest sense where understanding prevailed over fear. One day, a disturbance erupted near the zoo perimeter. Raiders from an outer system attempted a strike, believing that capturing the predator would give them power or ransom. Alarms sounded, but the predator anticipated the threat, moving before Mara or the child could react. It positioned itself between the enclosures and the incoming ships, quills spread wide, and its roar echoed across the grounds like a warning of destruction. The raiders hesitated, scanning their sensors and recognizing something beyond comprehension. The predator stepped forward, and no energy beam dared approach. Humans watched in awe as the being that had once bowed to them now defended them without hesitation. When the threat withdrew, the predator returned to its sanctuary calmly, allowing the child to approach first, offering the bow as if to say all was well, and that trust remained unbroken. The council sent observers to document the incident and confirmed what humans had known all along. The predator was no longer just a creature of the galactic zoo. It was an equal, a protector, and a reminder that in the vast stretches of the universe, power was measured not by conquest, but by the courage to stand together. Stories spread from planet to planet, and soon every system recognized the strange truth that humans, often underestimated, could command respect and loyalty even from the deadliest beings known to science. Mara watched the sun set from the observation deck, the child by her side, and the predator resting nearby. The galaxy had shifted in ways that could not be undone, not by warships, not by treaties, and not by fear. The predator had chosen its allegiance, and humanity had earned it, not by domination but by the courage to connect, the wisdom to remain calm, and the heart to face the unknown without flinching. And so the story of the predator and the humans became legend. It was told in whispers on distant moons, in classrooms on glittering stations, and in the corridors of power where delegates remembered the day the deadliest predator in the galaxy bowed only to humans. It was a story of respect earned, of courage shared, and of a bond that no one could sever. The predator watched. Humans thrived, and the galaxy understood that sometimes the mightiest force was not weapon or fleet, but a simple bow from a creature whose heart recognized those brave enough to stand with it. The galactic zoo had never seen a day like this before humans arrived with a purpose that no one could predict or challenge. The predator moved silently through its enclosure muscles, coiling like springs ready to release its power, yet there was calm in its gaze that no visitor had ever witnessed before. Mara and the child stood at the observation deck, their eyes wide with anticipation. As the predator approached, slowly its steps measured its head, held high, and its tail swishing with controlled rhythm. The other creatures in the zoo watched curiously, sensing a change in the air as if the atmosphere itself had shifted. Mara whispered to the child that today would be remembered in stories that would cross star systems and generations. The child nodded, gripping Mara's hand tightly, feeling a thrill that was part fear and part excitement. The predator paused as it reached the center of the enclosure, its gaze locking onto the humans who had been patient, brave, and clever enough to earn its trust in moments that seemed eternal. The creature lowered its massive head in a gesture that radiated both respect and recognition, and the air vibrated with a quiet power that could be felt in every corner of the zoo. Scientists, observers, and guards all held their breath, knowing that this act would forever redefine the rules of interaction between species in the galaxy. No barrier could contain the significance of the moment, For the predator had chosen not to bow for intimidation, not for control, but for admiration and acknowledgement of the courage humans had displayed. Mara stepped forward and the child ran to her side, their voices trembling as they called softly to the creature, which blinked slowly and moved closer, lowering its body further, in a graceful gesture that signified an unspoken bond. The other predators in the zoo seemed to lean back in instinctive understanding, sensing that the hierarchy had shifted subtly, yet irrevocably. The council representatives who had arrived from distant sectors took careful notes, realizing that diplomacy had never been this tangible and raw, and that the galaxy had witnessed a lesson in respect and power that no fleet or weapon could replicate. As hours passed, humans continued to interact, with the predator feeding it small morsels and sharing quiet words while it responded with a gentle tilt of its massive head, or the flick of its tail, a silent acknowledgement that it had accepted these humans as allies and friends. The child laughed, freely for the first time in months, running circles around the predator, who followed without haste or aggression, its massive body moving with elegance and precision like water flowing in a river that knew its course. The story spread quickly across communication networks from one system to another, inspiring awe, admiration, and sometimes disbelief that a creature considered the deadliest predator in the galaxy could exhibit such intelligence and loyalty toward humans alone. The zoo became a symbol, a place where understanding triumphed over fear and respect was not demanded but given naturally. The predator roamed its enclosure with a calm dominance, knowing it had made a choice and humans had earned it by patience, courage, and a willingness to engage without arrogance. Every visitor who approached was greeted with a measured glance, reminding them that this creature was powerful and wise, yet had learned to trust and honor the beings who had faced it with sincerity and bravery. Mara looked at the child and said softly that one day this story would travel further than any fleet, further than any weapon, and even further than any star had ever shown. And the child smiled, understanding the gravity of the moment and the beauty of trust that could cross species boundaries. The predator lay down, finally resting its massive head on the soft terrain of its enclosure, and slowly closed its eyes. Humans gathered around it quietly, some touching its fur, some simply watching the harmony that had been achieved, and the galaxy outside continued its vast rotation, oblivious to the bonds forged in this corner of the stars. Yet those who had witnessed it would carry the memory forever. The predator had chosen its allegiance, and humans had proven their worth, and the universe had been shown that courage, empathy, and respect were powers greater than any weapon or fleet. And in this way, a legend was born, a legend that would be told for countless generations, to come and remembered as the day the deadliest predator in the galactic zoo bowed only to human visitors. The end.